Hello everyone, Jim from Ohio here, and as you can see by what I've got on the trailer, I'm starting the insulation project for my pole barn. And what I decided to go with is this is the Owens pink 1.5" rigid foam board insulation. And I decided this was what I was going to put inside of the wall cavity. And I'll show you what the wall looks like and why I decided to go with this. And so I've got the top section is what I have there. And then down below here, I do have some tongue and groove 1" insulation. And it's also the Owens pink insulation. And I think that the 1.5" has an R factor of 7.5 compared with the white standard styrofoam insulation, which I think was only like a value of R2 or R3 or something like that. But the rigid foam board is much more durable and has much better insulation properties. You do have to pay a little bit higher price for it, but I think in the long run it will be worthwhile. While the inch stuff that I'm going to put in the ceiling, I think it only has like an R value of 2 or 2.5, but once again, it's a little more durable than the standard white styrofoam insulation. So when I get to the point where I'm putting the ceiling insulation up, what I'm going to be doing is just attaching it to the bottom side of the rafters, and I have some they're galvanized discs that are made specifically for this stuff, and each of the discs is about 1¼ inches around, and it has a hole in the middle and some fingers. The fingers bite into the insulation, and then a screw goes through the hole in the middle to hold it up to the rafter. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll probably do like a board and batten pattern and add additional boards along the rafters underneath the insulation, and also where the joints come together for the tongue and groove to add additional support for holding it up. And I'll wait and see how that works. Worst case, if I need to add more insulation to the ceiling later, I can always put in the rolled or batt insulation. But let me show you what the walls look like and why I decided to go with the 1.5" in the walls. So the way this barn is constructed is we have it is a steel building, and so there's a layer of steel on the outside of it. And the person who built this building did go ahead and put a 1/2" insulation between the structure, the wooden structure of the building, and the steel. And he did that just to help insulate it a little bit, as well as keeping it from sweating when there's a temperature change on the inside of the building versus the outside of the building. And I don't have any moisture in here, which is very good. And then I do have these clear panels at the top to allow light in, and this runs for one entire side of the barn. But you can see here that I have 2x6 lumber, and because the 2x6 lumber is 1.5 inches thick, what I plan on doing is filling this cavity between this timber and this timber with the 1.5" foam board insulation. And then what I'll do is I'll put either plywood or MDF over top of the foam board insulation to seal everything up and add just another little bit of insulation and provide me with a structure that's strong enough so that I can mount things on the wall. Now, I am taking some additional time as I'm doing this, and I'm on the support frame. I am marking each area that I have a timber here, just so that I'll know later on, I'll have a reference point. So if I go to mount something on the wall, I know not to just go through the plywood or MDF and the foam board insulation, but any screws or anything that I put in, I'll plan on also going through this support timber as well. So I've done that everywhere that I've got one of these timbers. And then because of the way this building was wired, the builder, when he put the electrical outlets in, this is one example that's kind of set in deep, and I'll definitely move this out when I mount the plywood so that this box will be on the outside of the plywood. But a lot of the wiring does run right along this timber. So what I'm doing as I'm cutting my insulation, I am going to leave a small cutout behind to allow for the channel for the wire to run along. And if I have to go back and add some spray insulation to fill in any voids, that's what I'll do. But what it'll look like after the insulation goes in place, you can see that I've already got this section of the wall done. And I'm cutting this as tight as possible so that I get a good friction fit. I'm not worried too much about if it's real loose, but if I get any areas with a void like I have here, what I'll do is I'll just go behind and I'll put in some spray foam insulation. But when I'm doing that, I'm making sure that I've got the low expansion stuff so that it doesn't push my foam board away from the wall. But so this section, you can see here, this one's a little bit loose. I just have it taped in place now. I'll go back and just put a bead of either caulk or expanding foam insulation in that seam. But what I'm doing is I'm pushing it behind the support frame. And I did that on both ends so that I'm going to fill in as many of the air gaps as possible. And so you can see additional mark here. This is an example of the wiring. I know that I have a wire running behind here so that later on if I go to mount something and I'm drilling a hole in the wall, I'm going to have a reference point to know where my wiring is. And so I've got the same thing over here. And I just want to be cautious and plan everything in advance. And this is a section of what it's going to look like after everything is said and done. I've got, I did use plywood here because I have a mini split heating and air system that I mounted already. But once again over here, I know I've got a wire running behind the wall here, and I've got a wire running along the wall right there. But this is the foam board insulation that I'm using, and I looked online to see how other people were cutting this, and I saw a lot of different ways. Some ways work better than others. Some people are using an electric saw, some people are using like a hot wire. I'm just using a small hand saw that has a very large tooth. This is actually a woodworking, like a back cut saw, but it seems to be working really well. I'm taking my time as I cut, but I'm getting a nice straight cut, and it's not ripping any of the foam board out as I cut it. And after I'm done with that, I'm able to just run my hands right along the edge of it and knock off any loose insulation. And this stuff does track all over the place, so I'm trying to be careful and cleaning as I go. Every time I cut a piece, I'm kind of sweeping that out of the way so I'm not walking and tracking it all over the building. But I'm going to continue on with this. I've got this section of the wall right here where I also have this vertical, or I guess it's on an angle there, just an extra support that I'm going to have to probably cut the foam board down the middle and slide one piece in this way. Over here where I've got my my panel that controls the barn, I've got the conduit running here, so I've got to, rather than getting one side in place, and what I've been doing is, because this stuff is somewhat flexible, it's a lot more flexible than the standard styrofoam stuff, but I'm being cautious that I don't accidentally break it. And so when I've done those sections down there, I was able to bow it in the middle to get a nice fit so that it would slide in and fill the void on both sides. Here, I'm going to have a little more of a challenge because this diagonal piece, And what I'll probably do is cut this piece down the middle so that I just have one seam going down the middle to match this. And I'll press it into the opening over here, slide it down, and then do the same thing with the other piece, and then probably just run a bead of foam insulation or caulk to seal everything in place. And I do have to, as I mentioned, I'll have to do something with this wiring. Now, I am taking these wire holders out. I found that those do tend to rip the foam up pretty bad, and I can't really press the foam in place. And I think once I get the wires held down by the foam, they're not going to move anywhere once this wall is enclosed. So I don't think I'll need them along this timber. I will go ahead and leave this one in place. But anywhere I've got a wire is a little bit more of a challenge. Well, on with the project. Okay, this section is done now. It was a little more of a challenge than I originally thought it was. I knew that it would be just due to the power panel being there and this diagonal timber. But what I ended up doing is, because the wiring was a real challenge, I did go ahead and just take the cover off of my electrical panel, and I turned off the power, obviously, but I disconnected the wires and I pulled them out of the box completely. And then down here, I drilled a hole, and I was able to reroute the cables so they're all nice and tidy in a channel that I cut on the back side of this piece of insulation. For the yellow line that I have here, I did have to cut out a corner right there, and but it's a lot neater than it was. And once I put the plywall or MDF plywood over top of it, it should, all of this should be hidden. This obviously won't be hidden, but this wire right here definitely will be. And then just to get the plywood, or I'm sorry, the insulation behind the panel nice and neat, I did end up having to cut a seam right here and then tap that piece over and then put this piece in. And then because of this diagonal piece, I did have to have another seam right here. Down at the bottom, same thing. I just cut the piece in the middle and was able to get that piece in place first, and then I was able to get this piece. And I'll go behind and put seam tape everywhere that I have a seam, just to keep any moisture or insects or air from coming through there. And then this top piece, because I was having to go behind the panel again, it was a challenge as well. So I ended up having to put a seam here as well as a seam here and here. But I do have everything covered right now, and that should make a big difference when I go to finish everything. Now, as far as the cut-off pieces, I'm trying to minimize the waste as much as possible, because this foam board is not the cheapest stuff. And I do have some channels that run up into the rafter area, and so you can see what I did was I used some of the extra pieces or cut off pieces of insulation, and I made it a real tight fit, and those are just friction fit up into that cavity. And eventually, when we do some other finishing of the barn, that'll either be painted or it'll be covered over with some other material. I'm not really sure what we're going to do yet in this half of the pole barn. But I don't know. I may go up and caulk around all of those. I really don't think that's going to be necessary, just because it is such a tight friction fit. To get it up in there, I ended up taking a flat piece of wood and a hammer and just tapped on the flat piece of wood so that I didn't damage the material. But I've got a lot more to go. Most of this wall is done now. I do have some shelves over here. I'm going to have to take down, remove the shelves, and get the insulation behind that. And then this wall should be done. Then, of course, I've got the entire rest of the barn to do, as well as the ceiling. So I'll give you updates as this project continues and as I make a little more progress with this. So take care, and thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next video.